Good evening, folks. Triple Crown here, coming to you from Vancouver, British Columbia. This is a round 6 summary. It was a big round, and we will get into it right away. This is Operation SF San Francisco. Forgot to mention that. And let's start with San Francisco, considering this is what the game is kind of all about. So the British came in first with their 2 tanks, and they liberated San Francisco, and the Americans were right behind them. And the Americans built a major IC there, and they brought absolutely everything they could to reinforce it because they did not want the Japanese to recapture it next turn. But the Japanese were setting up to do something. They've got 6 ground units and 8 aircraft that could counterattack next turn. Now, whether that is Western United States or the Pacific Northwest or somewhere, the Japanese Navy is sort of amalgamated now in Hawaii. Over here in Alberta, the British and the Canadians have about 8 ground units ready to counterpunch some fast movers in any direction next turn. So the Japanese now are going to, what are they going to do? Are they going to try to hold on to Hawaii, make it difficult for the Americans to retake, and try and have some naval superiority? The Japanese backed away out of the Carolines and to try and gain some more naval superiority of their own in the South Pacific with their navy down here. They've got a carrier, a battleship, a couple cruisers. And they did build 3 destroyers and 2 submarines last turn. And they started to make a little bit of inroads here on the Asian continent. They have completely wiped the CCP off the board. The Russians and the Japanese are still playing nice for now. But the Japanese have some pretty big stacks coming. But this territory here in Kwai Chau has been vacated, and the British and the KMT are hoping the Japanese put their stack in there next turn because it will get wiped off the board. That could change things if the Japanese decide to get too aggressive as they sort of creep along. The British still hold on to Siam, and they are building expensive units here in FEC in Calcutta. They built a fighter and a tactical bomber and an armor. And they still control the South Pacific Seas down here. They are slowly amalgamating more Navy with a cruiser and destroyer coming across from Calcutta. And they built a couple more destroyers and a submarine. And they've got a medium bomber sitting here in New Guinea. The Australians and the New Zealanders built a military base here in Ethiopia so they can help out next turn. And currently, a bit of a standoff here still happening in the Med, but not for much longer. The British are pumping out units in the Middle East while Moscow fell, and it fell easily to the Germans. The Germans survived with probably about over 30 units, all their armor and fast movers and aircraft. They lost 1 aircraft to A, and that was it. So the Russians are holding on to Stalingrad and Novosibirsk for now. They will be able to spend 17 IPP next turn. The Germans are getting rich. They've got 140 to spend next turn with money inherited from the Russians and the Italians. The Germans also did a reinforcement of all their fast movers that could make it down into Turin and Rome. It's just a mess down there. I've got to clean that up. But basically, the Germans were just making sure the British were not going to come and try and do some kind of landing in Rome or something. So make sure Rome is safe. And I'm sure now the Germans are going to be making a push into the Middle East or Novosibirsk and possibly down to Cairo. So and what happens, I forgot to mention, so Sweden goes pro-Axis when the Germans control Leningrad, any two of Leningrad, Stalingrad, or Moscow. So The Germans inherited a little bit of a navy here. They've got 4 boats from the Swedes, and also when Moscow falls and the Germans control Paris, Spain becomes pro-Axis. So the German tank that was here blitzed its way to Madrid. So the Germans are inheriting a navy down here in the Med and a couple more aircraft. That is a major problem for the Allies in the European theater. When that does happen, immediately, or is it? I can't even remember the name of this country here. It's not Argentina. Yeah, it is Argentina. The Argentines immediately become German, so the Americans came down. They had enough of that because there's a naval transport down there. They didn't want it doing anything tricky or sneaky, so they decided to wipe out the Argentine Navy. Last turn, there's a naval base here, so the American Navy isn't totally trapped. That was the final deciding factor. They got to do it. They got to do it now. But Portugal becomes British as soon as Spain becomes German. So the Portuguese Navy, a little bit of it's here off of the west coast of, these are coastal submarine and battleship, kind of useless, but they did have a naval transport that's making its way over to eastern Canada. And the British are now preparing for a Sea Lion. So they are starting to build infantry in London to make it difficult for the Germans should they choose to, go Sea Lion. But I would say now Western Europe is safe. This stuff over here in Canada, the small little navy here, is going to have to be very careful. Maybe Canada is going to build some units now and send them over into the to London. So that's what's going to happen there. I mean, look at the size of this German Air Force. They've got 5 medium bombers, all their tactical bombers and aircraft. So that's going to be a problem for the Allies. So I would say now I'm tipping my hand toward the Axis. Now they have the upper hand, but we will see what happens. There's still, how many more rounds? 9 rounds to go. So stay tuned, folks.